All right, greetings, friends. A happy second Sunday of Easter to you. This is an answer to Morley. Morley in our class, she asked a question in light of the chapter that she, in another dancer, as part of her dance company, are co-writing with the biblical scholar, Old Testament scholar, Ellen Davis, for a series for a publisher called T&T Clark, and it's going to be a companion on theology and the arts. I happen to also be contributing a chapter to that book as well. But one of the questions that Morley asked me was in light of a number of responses that she received from practitioners in the dance world when she shared the essay with them. And it seemed to be that the consensus was that they saw no value in this kind of work, this kind of academic work, this kind of work of scholarship, this kind of a way of thinking about and talking about the arts, but in particular dance. And so Morley was wondering if I had any insights on this. What does it mean to bridge, to integrate, to bring into closer exchange the worlds of academia and the worlds of the practice of art making by practitioners themselves? And Morley, just a couple thoughts here. Happy to continue talking about these with you in other contexts. But one of the things that I tell my theology students is that God communicates for the sake of communion. All of that communication and all of that communion takes place in a meaningful context, or a context that vests meaning in this act of communication that would lead towards communion. There is no context-less communication, and also no context-less communion. And if we don't understand the context within which communication is taking place, there's a good chance that communion cannot take place. So one of the things to say is that what Ellen Davis has largely written with your all's participation and input is what I would call high-end academic work, high-end scholarly writing. It's very dense. It doesn't have a lot of, shall we say, breathing space in the writing. It brings in a great number of scholarly voices or other kinds of voices into it, and it moves through this dense field, through sort of this dense activity of developing ideas. I would call her writing in this chapter high-end, and I think it fits this companion. At a next level, I would say, is my book, The Theater of God's Glory, which is based on a dissertation I wrote on John Calvin. And one of the chapters I have in here is called A Trinitarian Theology of the Physical Body. Now, when I submitted my dissertation to the publisher, Erdman's, they wrote back and said, we think this has potential to communicate to a broader audience beyond academia, beyond those that are, interested in scholarly issues around John Calvin. Would you be willing to rewrite your text so that it would communicate to a broader audience? And that's what I did. This is what I would call sort of second level high-end, so that it's still dense in some ways, but it's attempting to communicate through the use of the English language in a way that could be understood to a broader number of folks, including those outside of academia. The next level is what I call sort of truly like mid-level kind of academic writing, is what I have in the Glimpses of the New Creation, which is the book that came out this past fall. So I have the chapter on worship and the kinetic arts. So I took some of the ideas from this book, Theater of God's Glory, and then I breathed them out in even more, and I wrote the chapter in a way that I imagined I might write a chapter in a popular publication like Christianity Today or Christian Century, just slightly above of that level, but still communicating in a way that church leaders and lay leaders would be able to understand, but it could still be useful to classroom context. So this book is mid-level. Now there's another book I don't have with me. It's an essay that's in the book, a collection of essays called Beholding the Glory, that came out of a conference that Jeremy Begbie planned in 2000. It's written by a practitioner And that's what I call, well, in a sense, this right here is the book, my first book that I edited. This is called a broad audience, general audience type of writing. And this would be intelligible, hopefully, to the largest number of lay people, even though some lay people may feel that it excludes them for some reasons. So part of what I think is happening, Morley, is that the kind of language that is being employed, the ways that ideas are being developed, are peculiar to what I would call high-end academic thinking, high-end academic writing. It's actually rather difficult for most practitioners who have no exposure to, inclination towards that kind of writing to feel that it speaks to them in a meaningful way that names their world accurately, in a way that they would say, oh yes, that you've described my world and you have helped me to understand it. You've illumined it in theological and biblical ways, philosophical ways, that enables me to see my calling and identity and work clearly and convincingly. I think that's what's happening. So it's not that practitioners don't care about theology. It's not that practitioners don't care about work of scholarship. It's how these things are communicated one to the other, usually from the academic world to the practitioner. Sometimes practitioners do feel that scholars are speaking down to them, and I think that's really unfortunate. It does happen. I think it's regrettable. I think academics should not adopt that voice when they are addressing themselves to lay people, but if they do not see themselves writing to lay people primarily, but rather to their peers, then their language will be commensurate to their audience, to their context. So I think that's some of what's going on. I don't think yet there is a book that does really good theology, really good scholarship in service of a lay audience as it relates to dance practitioners. I think that book has yet to be written, and I hope it is written one of these days. That is my answer to your question. Will academics and practitioners find common ground? The answer is absolutely. But it depends largely on how things are communicated within particular contexts for the sake of a certain vision of communion. And perhaps the T.N.T. Clark Companion is not intended to generate communion with practitioners. It's intended to communicate, to accomplish communion with fellow academic scholarly types. For good. I hope so. Okay, that's my answer, Morley. Hope that helps in some way.